It's that time of week again, boys and girls. This is Association Chat with your host, me, KiKi L'Italien. I want to welcome all of you to this week's Association Chat. Listen, I know that you could be a million different places at this time. It's after the new year, and there's a lot of different things that you can do, but I think that this is totally worth it, and here is why. What we're talking about today is something that is being described as disruptive. A lot of people, a lot of associations are very concerned about what is happening with certification, and certainly the professional testing environment. The professional testing industry is booming. Over the last 3 decades in the US, the number of occupational licenses, industry certifications, post-secondary credentials awarded has jumped 800%. In the early 1970s, just a quarter of jobs required a college degree or post-secondary certification, and today 3 in 5 do. And there are now thousands of certifying institutions. But, my friends, with all of these certifying institutions and with all of these professional certifications, there's a need to ensure that those tests remain high quality. And today, we are talking with 2 great experts, Greg Sadesky, yes, psychometrician and chief scientific officer of Yardstick testing and training experts. This company specializes in e-learning and high-stakes testing for professional associations. And we have Mickie Rops, who is a consultant who specializes in educating organizations on credentialing options and guiding them to find the right fit for the challenges they face. She also conducts audits of full programs or program components to make recommendations for improvement, and she researches and writes background papers to inform decision-making. Now, in the lead up to this, I said that we were going to be talking about something that could be described as disruptive. And what we're talking about is virtual proctoring. Virtual proctoring. I have to just admit it. I didn't even know what that was. I could imagine, but I wasn't sure. And I looked into it a little bit. So as we get this chat started, and again, I'm so glad that you guys are here with me. As we get this chat started, I want to lay some groundwork and just establish for everyone who's watching, whether you're watching on Facebook Live, whether you're listening to this in your car later as a podcast, I just want to lay some groundwork for anyone watching who's not familiar with the professional testing industry or professional certifications. Can we get a description on what virtual proctoring really is? And since this was kicked off by Greg's wonderful article series that you can find on the Yardstick website, Yardstick Testing and Training Experts website, I'm going to go to you, Greg.
Okay, well, thanks. So traditionally, I guess in the certification and licensing industry, when you go to take a test, you'll go to a brick and mortar test center. So there'll be a live proctor. You'll check in at the desk. You'll show your ID. All that kind of stuff. You'll have to and it's actually a physical. There's physical infrastructure involved. Whether it's a paper and pencil test or a computer-based test. What virtual proctoring is it replaces that whole brick and mortar mode with proctoring on computer through a webcam. So there would be a proctor who would be, somewhere else on the other side of the internet, watching you take a test through the webcam and ensuring that you're not cheating and all that kind of stuff, just through the monitoring through the webcam and other kinds of functionality that's available on the computer.
Can I add to that?
Okay.
Just to add to that, because there is a lot of different terminology that's used. And so there really are kind of subcomponents of that some would say that you can actually have virtual proctoring without a live proctor. So the computer is actually doing the proctoring. So like it's typically called like a record and review later. So you're being, kind of proctored. You're being watched and someone could monitor later and see what, if you cheated or something. then there is exactly what Greg said in terms of there is someone actually watching you live. And that's really important from my perspective in credentialing, because if you look, we'll talk more, I'm sure, about it later, but from the industry perspective, industry standards perspective, that live proctor is key. So it's, so if you're doing virtual proctoring and you see there are lots of vendors out there, you find a vendor that says virtual proctoring, but there's not a live proctor, that's probably not going to meet the industry standards.
Right. Well, and that's such a concern, because you can imagine that someone wants to make sure that they're going in, they're taking this test, that it means something, that they've achieved this credential, and yet a lot of times people are concerned, right, when they're looking at this. From my understanding in reading this series of articles, the e-proctoring thing, Mickie, please give me the history of what, there was some sort of history-making decisions that were made about virtual proctoring just this last year, right?
Well, some of that is more perception, I think, than reality. I mean, I guess it's pretty historic, I guess. But so the industry standards have not, for example, I think some people thought, I think they thought that industry standards and certification prohibited virtual proctoring. And now suddenly they do. And I mean, and that's not the case, but it's been more that the requirements in the standards that have addressed things like security, that people have felt, and actually I think it's probably true, that the technology wasn't there yet. So that virtual proctoring hadn't been accepted under any of the industry standards. And, and I can speak to it primarily from the American National Standards Institute and their accreditation of certification. So from what big thing happened in the last year is we did see the first group actually get accredited under the ANSI accreditation using virtual proctoring. So that was big. But I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't like, ooh, suddenly now virtual proctoring is allowed. It was never disallowed. It just had not been proven to meet the standard before. And now we do have a case where it has.
And I think that that's such a good point, because, in this series, your point that you went into, you said right then, it was never that it wasn't allowed. It's that, people are afraid of doing something new. And I love the way that you put it. I wish I don't have it right in front of me, but it was essentially like, when there's something new or a new way to do something, you should see like a yellow caution sign, not a red stop sign, right? And go back to what those standards are.
Right.
But I want to go to Greg, because Greg, you had interviewed someone else, and they were maybe pushing back a little bit about the virtual proctoring. So can you, so can you explain a little bit about that? What some of that pushback is? What's some of the discussion and some of the maybe controversy around this?
Yeah, so there are two accrediting bodies, and I should mention too that we're really talking about high stakes testing. So we're talking about the most consequential type of testing. I mean, virtual proctoring can be put in place for lots of different medium stakes testing opportunities, and also like training and that kind of thing. But in the high stakes testing area, there's two accrediting bodies. One is ANSI, and the other is the NCCA, which don't ask me to tell you what that stands for, but in any case, and they both accredit these high stakes testing programs. ANSI was the first organization to accredit virtual proctor-based program. NCCA is more reluctant, and I think they're reluctant primarily because of security concerns. So when you're proctoring through a webcam, there's always the concern that somehow some really wily candidate will be able to figure out how to, even though they do all the room checks, they hold up their laptop and they look, they circle it around the room, they hold up a mirror to the computer and all that they'll be able to figure out a way to cheat, frankly, that they'll be able to, access materials that would be otherwise forbidden in a high stakes exam taking context. So that's been the main concern. And I think, it's been really interesting for me even to, to talk to Mickie and to talk to Isabel, who's the NCCA accreditor, and find out just where their perspectives, differ a little bit on how important or actually it's really about what vulnerabilities there are within the remote proctoring environment and how they compare to vulnerabilities that are in a traditional brick and mortar test center environment. And are they truly like different in amount, or are they just sort of different in kind? And that, you know, strategically there are ways to address or mitigate the, you know, the impacts of those concerns in either environment. So I think that's you know, that's really where the nub of the discussion is at this point.
Well, and I think it's interesting too, because it's not as if we're coming to everyone out there and saying, aha, this is the answer for everyone. But, you know, it is the answer for some, if not many of those people, those organizations that are looking for an answer, a solution, when they're looking at providing proctoring, you know, the service of proctoring. And I loved that you had gone in and you had done, Greg, a breakdown of the, you know, who's really benefiting from the virtual proctoring, and actually, you know, who maybe is not benefiting from it. For instance, the proctor who goes in person and, you know, maybe all of a sudden they don't need to, you know, they don't have as many people requiring their services, at, you know, or what have you. What I think though is that you had mentioned that technology has changed, right? Technology has changed. It's become a lot more savvy, a lot more advanced compared to what it was even 5 years ago. I went on and watched a little PBS NewsHour thing about virtual proctoring, and it was like 5 years ago. And it's funny because now, I think it was Coursera who was experimenting with this. You know, now you can see how then it was brand new, and they were like, hold the license up and straighten it out in the webcam and all of this stuff. And you can imagine with card readers and all kinds of things that there are all kinds of high-tech solutions for this that can remove some of the things that maybe got in the way before. Mickie, when you look at something like, you know, virtual proctoring, and you're assessing whether or not that's something that does this maybe have all of the things that it needs to do? Does it check all the boxes that it needs to check? What are some of the things that you're looking for, and maybe what are some of the red flags?
It really is a lot about the security. Greg kind of mentioned that too. So again, when we discovered through this testing group that was, certifying body that was already accredited in this case. So they're already accredited. They had been doing brick and mortar testing, and you know, and now we have to look at it and go, okay, now they have remote proctoring. Does this still meet the standard? We did kind of have to kind of check our attitudes about it at the door, because honestly, my reaction was, oh crap. I mean, because I really, this has not been proven to work. So I was like, okay, wait, let's just, you know, let's see if this works. And so we actually have the standard, right? And there's all the requirements that have to be met. So we went through and actually identified, okay, which standards, which requirements within the standard actually apply to the actual testing environment. And most of them really are the security related ones, and ability for someone to cheat. You know, so how can you monitor? So we actually, for every one of those requirements, we developed kind of a checklist or a list of questions that we would ask. And so we were looking for the vulnerabilities. And one thing we had to really tell ourselves though, and I think this is where the industry has to keep reminding themselves, that brick and mortar is not the gold standard. There are vulnerabilities in security with brick and mortar, because that's what I kept hearing from people is like, but, and I'm like, you know, you can cheat at a testing center. And the particular client where they were doing remote proctoring, we happened to be in India for their on-site. They're actually, one of their headquarters in India. And they said, Mickie, let me walk you down the street to the brick and mortar testing center and see how easy you can pay off that proctor.
Wow. Wow.
And I was like, well, okay. And so to me, that was a big aha. Let's not pretend that brick and mortar is the gold standard. We have to look at the standard and then kind of say, okay, does virtual proctoring meet this? And then also in the back of your head say, and does brick and mortar any better? And what I found through that experience, there were some things that the traditional brick and mortar may do better. And there were some things that remote proctoring does better in terms of security. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to go ahead because I want to dig into that a little bit, just because I see this question from Erin who came on and she says, hey guys, maybe I missed this because I was late. My apologies. Hey, we were kind of late too. All right. What is the problem being solved with providing virtual proctoring? So yeah, so she's saying, so what problem are we solving, by the way? What are we doing?
Oh, I'll take, well, it sounds, Greg, sounds like we both want to chat on this one. Hopefully we have different answers.
No, here, you go first and I'll chime in after.
I'll give you a perfect case for this. One of the problems, and then I'm sure, so maybe Greg will have a different one, that's being solved is not everybody is close to a remote, to a brick and mortar testing center. So I have a client who is based in Geneva, and the people they're going to certify are throughout Europe, Asia, Africa. There's no way there's actual brick and mortar testing centers in most of these locations. They're humanitarian workers, frontline. So for them, and they are using remote proctoring, it's kind of the only, this actually allowed them to say, actually, we actually can have a testing program that actually could get accredited, you know, using remote proctoring. They're not even offering physical testing centers. It's just not an option for their people.
Right. So you're able to reach places that just never had that as an option. Mm-hmm. And when you were talking earlier, and you were talking about the fact that, yeah, they said, okay, you want to see the physical location and see how easy it is to pay off the person. In some cases, it sounds like it may even be that the virtual proctoring would be something that is even more secure in some cases.
Well, from that perspective, I agree, because that's what, when you, most of the virtual proctoring systems, all of them work a little differently, but some of them, you are not assigned your proctor until 5 minutes when you log in and you're in queue, and then you know who the proctor is. There's no ability to work with them to devise a scheme. A lot of the brick and mortar testing centers, those are the same staff every day, 365 days a year. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a case where that ability to collude, is actually completely, if not getting rid of, minimized in remote proctoring.
And I want to just sort of jump in too on the, like, I think as far as the what virtual proctoring really enables, like, so that's exactly right. And in Canada, we definitely have lots of remote locations and so on. But I think the other sort of dynamic that this really helps set in motion is the whole notion of on-demand testing.
Yes.
So I work with the paramedic regulators here in Canada. They have 4 exam windows. So they can take every 3 months they can take the exam. But imagine if you were prepared to take the exam in between those set windows. And I think once you have on-demand testing, remote proctoring is a perfect fit for on-demand testing. And on-demand testing also, it solves the problem of accessibility. It also has some psychometric benefits in the sense that that if you get to choose when you take the exam, that you're going to be prepared. Like you're not going to go take the exam on a day that you're sick, for example. So on-demand testing, as supported by virtual proctoring, is a way to ensure that candidates or test takers are basically at their best when they take a certification or licensing exam.
And of course, the obvious probably we didn't mention is the benefit to the actual individual also is time and cost to get to a physical testing center, right? Goes away. They're taking it from their office or from their home. Because a lot of the a lot of the brick and mortar testing centers, it's kind of a policy for a lot of certifying bodies that you can actually have to travel up to 500 miles to get to a testing center. And if it's greater than that, then they'll consider developing, another one. Well, that's right. That's a lot of cost out of your pocket and time.
Yeah, right. That's crazy. Oh, okay. I see. We have another question coming in. And what kind of staff resources, Aaron, you with the questions, I love it. What kind of staff resources are needed to successfully execute remote testing and proctoring?
We'll give that one to you, Greg.
Oh, great. What kind of staff? Well, I mean, it really is much more of a subcontracting relationship, I would say. So, we partner with different organizations that do virtual proctoring. So, I mean, as far as what I would do as an exam developer, I do all the same stuff, but then we'd ultimately contract with a third party who would then, supply they would do the identity verification piece, so they'd enroll the people using some kind of biometric ID or whatever, and they'd also do the the actual live proctoring and all the stuff that goes with that.
Yeah, so I would agree. I mean, if you're the certification director, your time is going to be about the same because it's in that contracting relationship. But from what I have seen, and of course every vendor and every contract is different, but as a general rule, the kind of per hour testing fee for remote proctoring does tend to be less because they're not having to pay, they being the vendor isn't having to pay for physical facilities, right? They're paying for the expertise of the proctors and the technology, of course, but they're not maintaining testing centers and across the world.
Now, I did have a question about the technology because, like I said before, I watched this PBS NewsHour, and of course, they were reporting on the latest thing of, and it was 5 years ago. So the latest thing seems pretty rudimentary now. What does that technology look like? What are some of the things that we're seeing when it comes to today's virtual proctoring setup?
Do you want to take that? Or?
I'll take a stab at that. Sure. And I think, neither Mickie nor myself are like actually run a virtual proctoring company or have, that direct experience. But, a couple of things, of course, webcam, so you have to have a webcam and a broadband internet connection.
Yes.
I mean, so other than that, it's really a secure, like a place, an actual physical location that meets the standards, the proctoring standards. So, my understanding is that a typical process would, to have your physical location sort of accredited or seen as compliant, it would require you to, like I said before, pick up your computer, show what the environment looks like and so on. And the environment has to be set up in a particular way that assures the remote proctoring organization that the environment is compliant with the standards that are, they're consistent with remote proctoring. So, and what specific procedures goes on. I mean, I've heard, there's mirrors that, you'd have to use to make sure that you don't have things on the side of your computer here, or whatever that are again, allow you to cheat.
Yeah.
Right.
I think probably the best way I've heard this kind of described is if you're thinking about what actually is happening when when you're actually participating in a process, is it, if any of you have had worked with like the Best Buy Geek Squad, so you have a computer issue and you kind of log them in and they take over your computer. That's exactly what happens. So there's little. And yes, I'm not a technology person, but what is it called? Like an applet or something that, so basically you kind of sign them in, you give them permission, they come in and they have taken over your system and they will actually check to verify that you have no background programs running. So you can't do screenshots, you can't, all those things. They make sure you don't have a second monitor running. And they disable, so they're not trusting that you do it. They are disabling everything on your computer except for whatever program it is that you're taking the test on. So it's not just the webcam. That's an important element. And they scan the room, make you show under your desk, and they're watching you and they're listening to you and your surroundings. But that's not it. I mean, a very critical piece is they've taken over your system and they know if you're trying to do any of that, and they can shut down the test if you are.
Right.
See, that's incredible to me because that was sort of the piece that was missing for me on the NewsHour special little journalism short that I saw, because I thought, what would prevent somebody from having additional windows open or having their notes somewhere, and that
That's
much.
It. Yeah, they can't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are you hearing about? The way that this sort of technology is going and the future for virtual proctoring. I mean, where do you see this going?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, well,
I'm actually surprised.
I think virtual proctoring,
that we're not seeing more of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're just at the cusp of that. I mean, I'm not. It's hard to know for sure. When the sort of tipping point happens. But really, the fact that some of these organizations that there has been now a virtual proctoring virtual proctored exam that has met the standards, the highest standards for high stakes assessment, is really, to me, it's a watershed moment in professional testing. So, you know, I think that many more organizations, especially ones that don't have the resources like some of these big, these larger organizations to set up brick and mortar test centers, across the country or across the continent. You know, that's a really good advantage. That's a huge advantage for them. It's a huge opportunity for them to have a cost-effective way of an accessible way to have their exam administered. And the other I think really cool application for it is, like, there's been so much about the online universities, right? But everything has been online except for the exams, right? I mean, I know that's really where there's been lots and lots of opportunity in remote proctoring and online proctoring in the last number of years. But it'll be increasingly like that, with more online universities, more online virtual programs.
And KiKi, you know this, that in the association space at least, everybody needs to wait. Everybody likes to wait till somebody else has done it. Right. Nobody wants to be the first. And especially for, again, these, as Greg said, these are high stakes programs. So I do think it is important that we've seen, this method be acceptable under accreditation. That will change things. But I think we are at a tipping point. It's those things happening, and as soon as some big groups take it on, and then other people will go, okay, now we can do it. So everybody's just kind of waiting.
Well, and I think that is exactly it. It's like, okay, so where are the best practices for us, and who has run the gauntlet before we have? Right. And Ria here, I want to bring in some of the comments here. Thank you so much, folks, for participating. Ria says, on-demand proctoring and exam taking is very compelling, especially if we consider its intersection with microcredentialing. Russ says, this is very interesting. We don't even offer certification, so I'm staying on because it's so interesting. Right. And Michelle says, and don't forget that the geographical reach means testing across time zones, generally 24/7, 365, which is tremendously appealing to candidates. Yeah. So all of that.
I did see it. There was another question up there, KiKi, about what happens if you have to go to the bathroom. Did you see that question? And
I totally missed it. Yes.
And so here's what's important to know, that just like every certifying body has different rules for what they accept, even at a brick and mortar testing center. It's the same for remote proctoring. So this is why groups like ANSI and NCCA won't just say remote proctoring, virtual proctoring is acceptable or not, because there are different rules. And so some certification bodies could actually say that a restroom break is okay. Most of the ones I've been working with don't, because if I'm taking a test right now in my office, I go to my bathroom, there's nobody that can monitor me. Right? I could go read my notes and come back. So most will actually tell people at the beginning of the test, the rule, again, it will be a spec for that particular test. They will tell you, any breaks you need, you must do it now, because once testing starts, you may not leave the space. And if they do, then the test will stop. So that's the typical answer, that it's not allowed.
Aaron says, Rule 7, hold it.
Right.
Right. Well, so if somebody, if some of the, and we've heard from some of them already, if some of the folks listening to this are interested in finding out more about it, what are some of the next steps? Where do they go to find out more about virtual proctoring? Where do they even start with, who to talk to, how to learn more? What do they need to do next? All of that. And this is for either one of you, because I truly don't know who might have the best answer for this.
Sure. You want to take it?
Yeah, I think, when it comes to, sure. Yeah, thanks. When it comes to virtual proctoring, I mean, I think that any testing administration sort of mode has to fit within the larger, characteristics of the exam program. So if you're going to do things like, window-based exam administration, virtual proctoring might have more, a more limited advantage, or it might be sort of more on the cost basis. But but it takes, like, let's say, a larger item bank or a larger item development sort of effort to be able to enable on-demand type exam administration. So, really, I guess what I'm saying is we look at the situation that any particular organization is in on a case-by-case basis and really assess whether virtual proctoring makes sense for them. But if they want to go down that road, I mean, it's certainly, if you could obviously talk to any individual virtual proctoring organization, then there are many. I mean, I think it's growing all the time because it is a compelling technology. Also, you could absolutely talk to any one of obviously Mickie has a lot of expertise in that area. Organizations like Yardstick and other sort of high stakes testing providers have lots of experience in creating exams and then determining the most appropriate mode.
Yeah, and I mean, sadly, I mean there aren't books, there aren't a lot of resources. You're not going to just get online and find things on Amazon. That's for sure. It seems like most of the writings that is being done about virtual proctoring, the resources are from the virtual proctoring vendors. So finding actually, doing a search of who the vendors are and then going to those websites and reading the blogs and the articles and the demos and everything there. And of course, if you're actually in credentialing, going to the industry conferences, because, there are presentations and most of the companies are on the exhibits, on the expo floor. So, but you're not going to find them in your typical kind of books and articles, and that it's not available yet, I wouldn't say.
Yeah, and here we have Michelle saying, Ria, virtual proctoring, she's responding to Ria, virtual proctoring changes the game entirely. We have to now rethink the entire credentialing ecosystem. That's so
and just to pick up on that,
please.
Yeah, because I really liked Ria's comment about its intersection with microcredentialing, because I think that remote proctoring is really all about accessibility, and so is microcredentialing, right? So the idea that you could just you could go out and grab these credentials in a much more frequent kind of way. I mean, you quoted the statistics at the beginning of this podcast that the amount of the number of certifications is just increasing, and that's what microcredentialing is going to do as well. I mean, your qualifications are kind of like the sum total of all these little credentials that you get along the way, and virtual proctoring really integrates, I think, really nicely with that kind of model of just picking up those, as opposed to one sort of large certification at the end of this huge educational process or what it may be. That's
well, yeah, and when you think about, so if someone is wanting to take a traditional professional testing exam, a doctor, a lawyer, where they're going to take a 4 or 5 hour exam, okay, they're going to take that once in their life. And so maybe they're willing to travel and go to a traditional testing center, even if it's, across the country. But when you do look at microcredentialing and you're looking at the possibility of lots of little exams they want to take, yeah, are they going to travel for all those? I mean, no. and that's the one client that I have that I mentioned that's doing the remote proctoring. That is their system. They're certification programs, but they're micro certification programs, about 50 questions on each test. And yeah, they're doing it all by remote proctoring. Yeah, I can't imagine somebody traveling to go take multiple 1 hour exams on different days of the year. Right.
It's interesting because I think that just like we were talking about with the statistics at the very beginning, and I don't know, as you see it with so many different types of learning available, and then the testing that goes along with it, it seems obvious that you have to have some sort of way to make sure that quality in the testing remains high. But you had mentioned that, I forget how it was brought up in the article, but you had mentioned, Mickie, something about how it reminds you of, it's just sort of the same sort of thing as what you see with badging happening. And I started thinking about technology in this space, in this industry. And if you had to sort of, rank, and I know I'm just putting you guys on the spot with this, but if you had to just rank in order the technologies that are really shaking things up in your industry right now, what would the top 5 be, and where would virtual proctoring fall in that? I know.
So technology, I mean, I'm trying to think. I guess I'd have to think of what the list is before I could rank them. But just, I mean, off the top of my head, I'm probably, because nothing else is jumping up there, virtual proctoring is probably at the top of the list in terms of transformative. Because again, that changes for the testing, you know, the certifying body. It changes for the testers themselves. Access, cost. I mean, so I think that really does have to be up there. I mean, they affect things in different ways. I mean, I'm not going to say badging is inconsequential. It's important too, but it's different from you know, a different perspective. And that it increases visibility and marketing and positioning. So both of those are up there. But I'd rank remote proctoring ahead of badging. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, so I think that there's sort of these broad trends, right? Just like there are these broad trends in all kinds of industries, but I think, you know, automation and virtualization are probably like, they're two really big trends in testing. You know, there are things like automatic item generation. I mean, if any of the association, you know, any of the listeners on this, you know, on the show have undergone like item development, if they've been writing test questions, like it's a very difficult and time-consuming process. So there are models now that allow you to create many questions at once, which is just an awesome thing. You know, obviously remote proctoring is a big thing. Simulations are becoming really, really big. So, you know, there's, when you go to the professional conferences that Mickie is referring to, you know, there are these organizations that are now doing virtual reality simulations. Like, let's say, like for me, like, you know, I work with the paramedics in Canada here. Like, imagine if they could go into a virtual reality situation and do, you know, do some kind of diagnostic or therapeutic intervention in virtual reality. Like that would be, I mean, has the potential to be very cost efficient as well, you know, and really help the organizations create these high fidelity simulations without mounting these big, you know, creating these physical scenarios with, you know, ketchup and all the things that they do.
Yeah, you know, and all.
But
I was going to say, I'll add another one onto that made me think about this. I think another change that really does have the potential to transform the credentialing industry is software as a service, and the ability for certifying bodies to, sorry, Greg, to not hire you know, the traditional testing agency and psychometricians to do everything for them. Not that those are going to go away, but for those groups who want to, you can actually, you know, you can buy the question, the item banking software, and you can contract directly, you know, with, you know, companies that will do the remote virtual, you know, the remote proctoring and independent psychometricians that, you know, that you can hire. So this idea of always having a traditional company testing agency that does everything for you, you know, you can actually manage those things yourself and have, you know, your own. So you actually have the item bank on your server at your association. That's not the traditional way it's done. But I think we are at a bit of a tipping point with that happening too. The traditional testing agencies are not going to go away. There are groups that are always, they're not going to want to have the expertise on staff to do that. But I think we are going to see some smaller, and maybe it's the medium stakes programs that are going to do that. Absolutely, the technology and the software is there that they can actually manage a lot of these things themselves versus contracting the whole thing out.
So prediction for, you know, what you see as far as virtual proctoring, and let's talk about associations using this, and I'll just say in the next 5 years. What do you think? Any ideas?
Wow,
I know I'm telling you, bring out your crystal ball, but bring out your crystal ball and it's
I mean, as far as if I had to throw out a percentage, I don't know, but I think it has to take over at least about 25% of the market. I would be disappointed. Let's put it that way. If it doesn't, I mean, just because it has such possibilities, and I think the reason people aren't doing it is one, awareness, fear. Again, they're waiting for the big associations to do it, but it has such opportunity that it has the tipping. We're so close to that tipping point. I think I would be disappointed if not at least 25% in 5 years.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think we're in an industry that's really risk averse
Right.
in lots of ways. So I think what we're going to see are the so I think some of the big organizations, like say some of the big healthcare organizations. I mean, frankly, some of them are still doing testing in paper and pencil. That didn't come off quite right. Of course, you can test in paper and pencil, and it's amazing. Like it meets all the standards of psychometric defensibility, no question. But within the broader trend of going towards computer, like we are in a risk averse industry, not everyone wants to even make that leap. So the chances that big organizations like that, who have really well established sort of logistical systems and all that, actually transitioning to something disruptive like this are pretty small. But I see a real opportunity in a lot of those more nimble associations that are doing certifications that probably are already really amenable to technological innovation. They'll be jumping at this kind of thing, really readily because of work like that ANSI and others are doing that are ensuring that the standards are met for high stakes testing. So I think 25%. I think maybe it's maybe a bit of an overestimate, but it's not far off in 5 years. And I think it'll be mostly those kind of smaller, nimble organizations.
I love it.
Though the IT certifications, some of those are starting to go that direction. And once people see, okay, wait, they know what they're doing here in technology. So if they're trusting this, it must be okay. So I think it's getting some of those biggies that everybody trusts to do it.
Why do you think? And I know we're coming up at the end of the hour, but I feel like we have so much more to say. Why do you think that there isn't more that is being written about this other than what the vendors are putting out there? Because it seems like this would be, people are hungry for it. They need the information. There's definitely a market for it. The money is there. It's a growing area. So what do you think the thoughts are? It's just frankly that people are risk averse and they don't want to be the first ones to do it.
Yeah. And I think it's also because, again, there was an opinion that the industry standards didn't accept it. So it's kind of like, well, if the industry standards don't accept it, I mean, no one's going to start talking about it. Because I was just surprised at that when, at some of the industry conferences last year, and actually one I didn't attend, and I was hearing from people afterwards, they were saying, oh no, there were conversations, that this is not acceptable for the industry standards. And I'm like, what? That was never the case. But that impression has been out there that it is not acceptable. So that's a big hurdle that we have to get over.
I have to say, Jay says, this is so funny. Cars are going to be driving themselves. Planes are going to be flying themselves. It's hard to imagine that virtual proctoring won't become the industry standard for testing within 5 to 10 years. Right. Yeah, I completely agree.
Good point.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think so. There's this notion of defensibility within testing, but there's kind of like a word in parenthesis before defensibility, which is legal defensibility. And there's always that vulnerability that if you, that as a testing organization, if you make some mistake or that you create some vulnerability within the testing environment that compromises confidentiality or security or accuracy, that you open yourself up to a legal challenge. Right. And I think that's where a lot of that risk averseness of our industry comes into play. And I think also, quite frankly, associations are almost beholden to their psychometricians. So I think the psychometricians, which is kind of largely a poorly understood profession as it is, if they say virtual proctoring is acceptable, then the associations and the regulators will go, oh, well, maybe it's acceptable. It's not necessarily up to the associations to say, we're just going to push forward with this new technology. We're going to be part of that disruptive community. They're going to take advice from a small group of people who are influential. And I think in lots of ways, we as consultants like Mickie and as psychometricians like myself, we have to be convinced that that virtual proctoring technology is consistent with the standards that need to be in place for high stakes testing before, so we're going to be helping to lead that change as well.
Well, I have to say, this has been a fascinating conversation. And the thing is I I would be fascinated to see your SEO results on those articles that you've written about virtual proctoring, because I bet you get a lot of traffic from that. Mostly because when I did this search, you guys, and this is an opportunity, when I did a search to get more information, of course I go to YouTube because I want to hear what people are talking about. I want to see the videos. I want to see where things are. And there's not a lot out there. And I mean, this is an area where there is so much growth potential, where there's just no way that it's not going to go in that direction, that those thought leaders, those people, and it starts with the people who are doing the work, yes, but those who are going through the process and learning from it, there's so much opportunity here, guys. So, if anyone wants to contact you, Mickie, Greg, where can they find you? Where should they go?
Go ahead, Greg. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, website, msrops.com, MSROPS. Facebook, Mickie Rops Consulting.
Okay.
Those two primary.
All right.
Yeah, you could go to the, there's the getyardstick.com website, which all the blogs are on. You could contact, I just got a brand new email address, but it's probably better to use the old one. It'll still work, which is Greg S at getyardstick.com. I'll post it in the chat link here as well.
And you guys, because we had sort of a delayed start today, because I had to switch computers and browsers and everything. I just want to let you know that Fontiva, thank you, Fontiva, for being our sponsor for Association Chat. Fontiva has been fantastic all through 2017, supporting Association Chat. If you want to support Association Chat and conversations like these, then there's also a Patreon page for Association Chat, and you can donate there however you feel comfortable, to be able to support the work that's going into this, because frankly, I don't want to sell advertising and make this NASCAR. This is something that is a conversation that we have every week that I think is a very important conversation, a place to come and talk about these things. So thank you for joining us on Association Chat. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mickie. And you can always catch episodes of the chat the following Monday after the live chat has happened on Association Chat podcast for iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spreaker, and iHeartRadio. So until next time, everyone, keep asking questions to learn every day. As Joseph Campbell once said, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. All right.
Thanks, KiKi.
Everyone. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, KiKi.
Thanks, bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Association Chat. If you like this episode, or even just the concept of the show, please subscribe to it. Share it with your friends. Share it with your enemies. Comment and talk about it using lovely words on all the socials. You know how it goes. Sharing is caring.